And I'm Sawyer. And you're listening to Our House, A to Z.
Okay, so we're back. Good to have everybody back with us. Good morning.
Happy Friday. If you're listening on Friday, everybody.
Good morning, Friday morning listeners. You get like the early edition, like when it first comes out.
Early edition.
Yeah. Remember that? Remember that show?
I used to love that show.
Why did you love it?
I don't know. I just loved it. Maybe I loved the main character.
Oh, the guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was
I
cool.
loved that guy.
And the cat.
Oh, yeah, and the cat. Yeah.
Oh, this is on the paper. I just remember that from the intro.
I think that was at the intro, yep.
Yeah.
Aw.
Funny stuff.
Good old shows.
If they were just all so good. So everybody knows we're building a greenhouse. Everybody knows that we are like doing the raised bed garden thing, and we're not the only ones.
No.
Apparently it's kind of like a craze right now. I promise I did not realize it was trending when we started this. Can I just say that?
No, I think everybody is just like sensing the same stuff. Like people are sick of paying crazy prices for things. People are sick of not being able to get access to things.
Right.
I mean, never mind the fact that gas is expensive. So you're like, how many times am I going to run over to the grocery store to grab things? You're like, this is great. I have something right here.
Yeah, and we've already started pulling lettuce.
Yeah.
Like harvesting that. and
Lots
I
of
love
lettuce
that.
and spinach, yep.
Yeah, so that's exciting to me. I love that you actually can do it. For some reason, there's like a big gap between like getting plants to grow and then actually like carrying the food from the lawn to the table.
I know. Well, I think that gardening is so interesting because it's such a learning curve. Like there's so much to learn. It feels like you never stop learning.
Yeah.
There's like always something that is like different that's thrown at you. Like, oh, it's a little bit drier than it usually is. That's why that's happening. Oh, it's wetter than it usually is. Oh, it's too windy. Oh, a new kind of bug that you never dealt with before. Like I feel like it just never ends with all of that stuff. And I was thinking the other day as we were cutting stuff down and I was pulling lettuce and spinach, I was thinking about the very first garden I ever had, and you had built a raised bed for me in our old house.
Yeah.
You had built two. And I was like so excited. And it's like literally have no idea. Like you're just going to the store, you're buying every vegetable that looks good or like you eat. And you're like, I'm just going to plant all this stuff. So you like way overplant everything. But then you also like, I remember you're like spinach. I like spinach. Let's buy a spinach plant.
Right.
And you're like, buy a spinach plant. And you're like, wow, this looks so good. I'm just going to like let it grow. Like I'm going to let it grow and I'm going to take a couple leaves at a time. And then it like bolts straight up and you're like, oh, I guess that's it. Okay. Like you're not supposed to let that happen. Like you're supposed to have eaten it before then. Like all these things that happen that are so funny.
Oh, that's awesome.
Or you like take the whole plant out and you're like, oh, you were supposed to just take some of the leaves and like leave the rest of it to keep growing. You're like, didn't know that. Okay.
Lessons
curve.
Learned.
Yep.
Learning curve.
Yep.
That's so funny, man. That feels like so long ago. But you know what? It does have me thinking, and first of all, having a lot more respect for farmers.
We are farmers.
Yeah.
Because it is like nonstop attention. But also, I think it has me thinking more consciously of food. I think
does?
it's like a simultaneous thing. It's
I'm
like
so proud of you.
well, you're watching.
You're
this,
wearing a Pepsi t-shirt. But I'm still so proud of you.
Yeah. Yep. It's true. And I'm about to eat some Pop-Tarts. But I think what's cool about it is when you're watching something grow, it's just like when you're watching kids versus raising your own.
Yeah.
You know, there's like a total different consideration and concentration and focus. And so you're watching this grow and you're like thinking, wait a minute, everything else, like what else happens that we don't know about with all the food that we eat and all the food that's processed and everything else. And you know, I've lived my whole life and everybody knows I talk so much about Pop-Tarts that like I'm not a super health nut whatsoever. I don't think either of us are. I think over the last maybe couple years we've become more conscious probably because we've both seen effects of like gluten. And we're not like gluten-free people at all, but we're
conscious.
We've realized that okay, like there's a threshold where when we take in too much of this, it affects us. And so I wanted to ask you, because I know you've done a lot more research on this in the garden world, how much of this has been a conviction that's tied to your faith and your walk, and how much of it is just you're a human being that just like wants to be healthier, or you want your kids to be healthier?
I think for me everything's always connected. You know how they always talk about like men or have all these like boxes like where everything's like compartmentalized, and women it's like everything's open and like connected. It's like a big computer screen with all the windows popped up and it's all connected. That's exactly how I feel about healthy eating. And like you said, we are like not health nuts by any stretch of the imagination. But I think being conscious, especially when you like go grocery shopping and stuff, and I do think you're talking about like raising your kids, but I kind of see it a little bit like your faith journey. a little bit in how you do it, because it's like, what is this? This feels like really good for me. Like, okay, it seems good. It seems right. It actually seems like the thing that makes the most sense. Wow, like this is so weird. And then you kind of grow in it, and you always hear people that are like way more knowledgeable, and you're like, wow, I feel so insignificant and like so unlearned and all of those things. And you're like, okay, but I'm just going to keep going, and I'm going to make little choices, and I'm going to make little decisions, and I'm going to try to do the right thing here and make the right choice here. And it kind of just like snowballs.
Yeah, okay.
I think into a lot of good decisions. And I feel like even telling people like, oh, this is the same thing as having a garden I feel like is a whole different even like step of trying to make good choices for our bodies.
What do you mean by that? Having a garden is a whole nother step of trying to make good decisions.
Like you can go to the grocery store. Like you might not be somebody who has a green thumb, or you might be somebody who is like, I live in an apartment. I can't have a garden, or I can do a little window garden, or my landlord let me put a little tiny box outside. So maybe not everything I can do on my own. But I think all of us have to eat.
Yeah.
So what choices can you make when you go to the grocery store that are a little bit better?
Yeah.
Just a little bit better.
Right. Which, by the way, will be a little bit more expensive.
Which is a little bit more expensive, but
it'll be a little bit harder.
Yep.
It'll require a little more time, more insight. It will require turning the product around and reading the back sometimes.
Yeah. And I think sometimes that is like good enough, is to say, okay, like there are a million levels to that. Like, and then it's like, well, is it local? Well, is that actually something that's in season here, or did it get shipped in from across the country and it spent like the last week in like the back of a truck? I mean, there's a lot of things you can.
And is that always a problem? Necessarily?
No, not necessarily. You might just not know where it came from.
Yeah.
Or what kind of farm it was on, or whatever, which is fine. But again, little choices, little tiny things I think are huge. Like Zach said, checking the back of a package. What the heck is in this?
Yeah. Well,
is it full of chemicals?
I was eating a bag of salt and vinegar chips the other day, a brand that will remain nameless so we don't lose our sponsorships. It's a bag of chips that I eat all the time.
Yep.
And you picked it up and totally cast a lot of shade on this particular bag of salt and vinegar chips that I love. Mm-hmm. And you were like, did you read this? And I'm like, no, I can't read that because it's in a language I don't understand. And you're like, this right here, it says like in bold letters, biomechanically engineered.
Genetically modified.
Genetically modified, yeah. Genetically modified. You're like, shoot.
Probably shouldn't. I mean, there's probably potato chips you can buy that are just potatoes and seasoning.
Yeah.
I mean, that's actually something you can buy, but we just don't pay attention.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
And it's $1 more. Attention. So we look at the shelf and we're like, well, am I going to spend $4.99 or $3.99? Yeah. And you're like, I'm going to spend $3.99, and I'll eat the bio-engineered food.
I don't usually look at the price. I know that's a big shocker to you. I don't usually look at the price. I usually go based on flavor. So if I've tasted like every chip down the aisle, for the most part, it's like, I know I love these. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to try the one that's healthier because I don't know I like it. Right. I'm going to stick with what I know. And so I think a lot of America, well, yes, maybe some are just always doing the penny pinching thing. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people just eat what they know, you know?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think eating is just a habit. I think that is so much as habits built a lot of times from when we were kids.
Yeah.
America, like if you think about, and I've listened to a lot of like books and podcasts on this, but America is like notorious for being the only people who eat cheap and buy expensive everything else.
Interesting.
It's like we'll buy the most expensive TV. We'll pay all the subscriptions for every network that we can get. We will buy expensive purses, expensive clothes, expensive shoes. But when it comes to food, grocery shopping, we make sure we get the cheapest thing that we can get. And that's the only stuff that's going inside your body.
It's the only thing that matters.
Well, it's just but that's the only country that does that. Do you know what I mean? But has the money to actually make better choices. So if you spend an extra like $40 at the grocery store, it's like, okay, maybe we don't get Starbucks this month.
Yeah.
But the actual like value is so much greater.
Yeah. Well, and also I think, again, so there's the dollar thing, which is maybe some of our listeners like that resonates with you. Like, oh, that's true. Like I'm going to pick the cheapest fruit drink or the cheapest whatever, whatever that is.
But it's not, I feel like it's not intentional. I think people are, this just makes the most sense. I'm going to save the most money. So you're not thinking too much about it.
You're not thinking of like giving all your kids cancer or something like that. That's not what's going through your head, hopefully. But I think there's another thing, and it is convenience.
Yeah.
And I think that is what caused the rise of fast food to begin with.
Right.
And how many nights a week, how many meals a week are we consuming something that was not prepared with nutrition in mind? When really we should be eating every single thing we eat with nutrition in mind.
Right.
But we're not. We're like, I'm hungry, and there's this quick neurological connection to how do I satisfy that?
Yeah.
Quickly on my drive home.
Right. I was listening to something recently and I thought it was really funny because she was saying, she's like, decades ago, women were like, oh, I'm going to fight for my rights. Like, I'm getting out of this house. I'm not doing this homemaker thing anymore. Like, I want my rights. I'm going to work. I'm just as valuable. Like, all of these things. I'm going to work. I'm going to work. I'm going to work. So all the women go to work. Then it's like, joke's on you because now you have to work and you have to do all like healthy cooking and all the grocery shopping and everything else because otherwise everybody's eating garbage.
Wow.
So now you either are unhealthy and you get to work.
There you go.
Or
so
you're trying to find somebody else to help and do all the things.
Are you making a statement about women here that they're notoriously bad decision makers? Or
Zachary Thomas.
I want to be clear. I want to make sure our listeners know what you're saying here.
No,
that's
I'm definitely
not
not saying that. I'm definitely not saying that. I think across the board, so many women that I've talked to are coming back to those same convictions of like, man, what the heck? Like, I still want to work and there's still purpose in that. And I still feel called to do this or do that. But you have this like never ending burden to feed your family well and make all these choices. And, I know that pediatricians, like tons of pediatricians now are saying not even to give your kids milk products and dairy products unless they have like you have to check them and make sure like there's zero hormones because so many girls are going through puberty so early. Yeah.
Well, I think the chicken nuggets have something to do with that too.
But growth hormones.
The amount of hormones and stuff. And our kids are on a diet of 100% hormones. They're like literally taking them like medicine.
Right.
Animal hormones.
Right.
Like cattle hormones.
Right. Well, but I know, but so that can feel very overwhelming and you can feel like, what am I not supposed to feed my kid anything? Does that mean I can never buy frozen food? No, it means when you go to the grocery store, grab a bag of chicken nuggets and look at the back of it and get one that says there aren't any growth hormones in it.
And pay $3 extra.
And pay the $3 extra.
Well, I want to also say this in defense of the women's lib movement of
defense. You're always defending women's
50s,
lib.
60s, 70s. Mm-hmm. I feel like the women who were leaving the homestead at that point, there was not a mass awareness of what was going on behind the scenes in food processing.
Yeah.
So people weren't thinking that. You weren't necessarily thinking that if I buy a frozen version of this or if I buy a canned version of this as opposed to a fresh version, you're not considering the implications on your family's health because it just wasn't out there.
Yeah.
Like at the time they were advertising it was like a bonus that your food had been crop dusted.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? We're like, and we scattered Agent Orange over everything. Yay,
but you think about, but canned is the same thing. Like, look how convenient. You can have this forever. You can have it whenever you want it. You can have it. Isn't that the American way? Like, you can have it whenever you want it. It's ready for you.
It'll come in really handy for the apocalypse.
Right,
I'm just
exactly.
saying, canned food is great.
I'm not against canned food. I think you should be canning your own food.
Okay.
But I think that's great. I think having it on hand, I think buying extra cans and having them is a great idea.
Even to the point that there was a time not that long ago, what you gave babies was milk and honey.
That's because milk helped the body grow. Milk is about the most perfect food there is.
And now they're saying not to give milk or honey until they're, not an infant anymore or not a toddler or not a
After
what?
one. After they turn one, yeah.
And it used to be that was like some of the staples of the early childhood development.
Right.
And you're like, wow. So who was wrong and when and where? And I think what changed was the milk and honey.
Well, what's so interesting about the milk, and this is way too much information that nobody's going to want to know, is that
I want to know.
There are like certain like lipids in your stomach that only kids under 3 have the ability to process.
Okay.
And so when you get like over 3, it's like almost like you weren't meant to have cow milk. And so it's very interesting. However, they've done studies like all over the world and they have found like places where there's a lot of farms. It's like the stomach has almost like evolved in a way to be able to process more. And so they have like, I can't even remember what it is, like some sort of enzyme or something in your stomach for people that like live on cow farms or people that have way more milk that is kind of like evolved some to be able to process it. But if you go to like China, like Asians like don't have any of it in their stomach. Like they are almost all lactose intolerant. Like they can't process because they never
So what about like cheese or yogurt or any of the other dairy products? Nothing. They're not consuming any of that.
I don't know.
Well, it makes sense to me that adults are not meant to drink what was meant for baby cows. Just as a nature contradiction, it just feels wrong when you think about it like that. And yet we have milk delivered to our house every week.
Yeah.
And it's like, really healthy milk, but it's still meant for baby cows.
Yeah.
At the end of the day. So I'm not sure.
But that's still like milk that you can get and make cheese from. You can still get and make things from. You can still give it to little kids, like all of those things. But it's like the best choice for milk are like these, like, as long as you're like getting it after it's been from a cow, like in the last day or two. I think Monroe, their guarantee is like from the cow to you in like 36 hours or something.
See, I don't know if that's long enough. Is that long enough to actually process that?
It's not supposed to be.
I mean, like,
it's very like low pasteurized.
Like my mouth on the udder, like
those are our only options.
I feel like isn't there some process that the milk should go through to make it safer?
Yes, they do. They do. But then if you get milk in a grocery store, I mean, it could have been like over a week since it's come out of a cow, and you can actually see when you go to buy your milk. Don't buy milk that says highly pasteurized. Anything that's highly pasteurized is like horrible, which means that you might have to spend extra money on milk.
When I read things like "you lead us in green pastures," I'm thinking like that's where the milk was pasteurized.
Oh my
was
gosh.
in green pastures, so it's like safer. But that's just the Midwesternness in me probably talking where everything is, Anyway. So you said that there's lipids in the stomachs of kids.
Don't quote me on that. It's something like that. It's some sort of enzyme or something. I can't remember what it was called.
The question I have is it possible that those are there naturally for nursing?
I think so.
For like kids.
Yes.
So while they're nursing, they're processing a mother's milk. It's just bizarre to me how all of this stuff plays in. And even though stomachs have evolved in rural communities to process milk, should they have?
Yeah.
Should they have? Like, should our bodies be tested and challenged and stretched to the point where we can consume chemicals and still live?
No. I don't think so.
I don't think so either. I don't think that's evolution.
No, I think it's a cool testament to the body.
Yeah.
But I don't think we should.
I don't think we're meant to.
You're like, do I want to keep burning my skin and find out like how long I can do that?
So,
like, not really.
So what would you recommend to somebody who's like feels a little bit of this conviction? Like, where do you start?
I think it starts at the grocery store. I mean, I think there's so many like little decisions we can make. And speaking like to the moms specifically, I think we need to change our perspective. I think our perspective is cooking is work, shopping well is work, finding good choices when you go out to eat is work. It's the harder thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's so what we've been sold culturally is we have no idea how much influence advertisement has had on us, just like disgusting amount is that we buy things because it's in our face all the time. We see it. It looks really good on TV. That looks like a really healthy family eating that. There's no way that skinny girl could eat that and it be bad for you.
Wow.
Like all those things we think in our heads, and it's all advertising.
I mean, the fact that the colors were chosen
everything
to sell you.
Everything.
Yeah.
Like
the font was chosen to sell you.
Right. Right. Every single thing is advertising, and it's all about money. And so I think that if we can somehow try to see beyond some of those things and just be intentional, like it might take longer the first few times you go to the grocery store to figure out like, oh, okay, I'm not going to buy that anymore. I'm not going to buy this anymore. Like, what are my alternatives? Pick a couple things. I think the most important things to start with are the meat you buy, the milk you buy,
because you're
and vegetables.
Consuming a lot of
I think
it,
if you can start with those three things and say, like, these are the ones I'm going to start with. I'm only going to buy organic, or I'm only going to buy stuff from the neighbor down the street who has a fruit stand. Go to the local fruit stand. They're actually way cheaper to buy stuff from a fruit stand and a fruit and veggie stand. It's so much cheaper than going to the grocery store and buying organic.
Really?
Yes,
but you're just not guaranteed that it's organic. But really, what does organic even mean anymore? Doesn't something have to be?
That could be a whole nother podcast.
I think you have to have 7 generations of no chemicals in order for something to actually be registered as organic.
Yeah, but there are so many things now that, like, because of the mighty dollar, like, you have grocery stores now that will stop selling, like, things that are, like, local mom and pop shop that are actually truly organic and stuff because they can't get the classifications and the qualifications through the food.
FDA.
Yes. Yeah. So FDA won't approve it. It's like, oh, well, no, because you make it on this type of farm. And even though it's all organic, we're not going to sell it because it's a money thing.
Right.
So instead you pick other things that are more expensive and...
Okay, so the moral of that story is go to your fruit stands.
Yeah, I mean, around here we have Four Town Farm. We have Quality Fruit Land. Like we have...
Johnson's.
We have Johnson's Market. I mean, we have a lot of places, and that's not just like your neighbor down the street that has a vegetable stand outside and is like, no, we don't spray anything. We don't use whatever fertilizers, and we don't use bug sprays and all of those kind of things that are so cheap.
And I think one thing that I've noticed about you too is you have also added to your list of one bazillion things that you do. Like you're looking for recipes to use more readily available healthy items. And I think that, again, this requires thinking outside your normal menu.
Yeah.
Thinking outside the bun. You know, it's like moving past, here's what I make every Tuesday night. Here's what I make every Wednesday night. Like, if you're growing something, if you're able to grow a bunch of whatever or pick up whatever at the fruit stand then or at the vegetable stand, then like, okay, let's get creative about how to use this.
Right.
And then sometimes this also requires retraining your kids a little bit.
Yeah. That's the worst part.
We say it's the worst part because it's painful, but it's not as hard as I think it seems. I think kids will gravitate more to normal than adults will.
Yeah.
Because they need that routine, but they also are more resilient than we are and will be able to sustain a broken routine quicker. And so I think that, you know, creating a new one for your kids where it's like, hey, you know what? We're not going to do fast food this many nights a week, or we're not going to have processed food this many nights a week, maybe one night a week or something.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, and I think that that's great too. I don't think it has to be, when we're saying like little increments, it's exactly that. It is not like the condemnation because we went through a drive-through this week or we went through a drive-through twice this week. It's like, hey, usually we do 4 nights and we're only going to do 2. Little steps, like baby steps. And I think it's great. I think it can feel overwhelming, but I feel like as a mom, as parents, as just a human on earth, I feel like we should just be able to say, like, retrain our brains to, it's not a bad thing. It is the harder thing at times.
Yeah.
But in the long run, it's the better thing. And I feel like we need to just kind of keep saying, like, hey, I get to make a good choice for my family. Like, I get to make decisions that affect my kids, like, the rest of their lives, not poor choices. And I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I do. I think it does, and I think we've got
chore that it feels like.
Well, it's like anything else. You know, we've talked about finances on here. We've talked about, you know, the Dave Ramsey thing. We've talked about how it's the $5 and $10 decisions, not the $1,000 decisions that end up making and breaking us financially. I think the same thing goes when it comes to nutrition.
Yeah.
I think it's the way we nickel and dime. It's the little things. It's the snacks between the meals. It's the drink at the gas station, because none of those are one-offs.
Yeah.
Never. I don't care who you are. I never believe that that's a one-off. I think it may be a less common routine, but it's a pattern nonetheless.
Right.
The more that we're conscious of that and breaking that. And I'll tell you what, one thing I've noticed, I remember when I first moved up to New England, and I didn't have any money, and I was on campus, and I was eating from the salad bar in the lunchroom like every day because I didn't really like the meals that were made. And so I would like eat from the salad bar, and usually like, you know, something simple, whatever. And I'd been here like a semester, and we went with a group of people. We went to McDonald's, and I got like a sandwich meal with some fries or something like that. And I literally ate in Seekonk, drove back to the school parking lot, and got out and was like violently ill, like in the parking lot, and just like so grossed out. And I was like, what in the world? And I knew as I'm eating it, I'm like, this feels wrong. Like, my body's not going to like this, because I hadn't eaten fast food in so long.
Yeah. I mean, I think we've all had the fast food like sickness.
Yeah.
At some point.
The heaves.
Like, oh, dang, I shouldn't have eaten that.
The Mickey D heaves.
Not to condemn any restaurant.
No, definitely not. That's why we're not saying names, like the actual name.
Sawyer would be very disappointed because it's his pancake place of choice.
Yeah, that's true. Shh, don't tell anybody that. And then you and I, like, again, we very rarely are we eating like that, I feel like. You know, some fast foods have some healthier things. We'll get salad sometimes and stuff like that. But not that long ago, again, it was like kind of late, and we, on a whim, ended up grabbing sandwiches or something from a fast food place, and it was like we regretted it within 30 minutes.
Yep.
And I think, honestly, that's a good sign to me.
Yeah.
That means that my body is not used to taking in that kind of garbage.
Right.
And I'm like thinking, okay, I just need to remember that.
Yeah.
I need to be conscious of that.
Yeah.
And maybe go to bed a little hungrier.
Right.
And be okay with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think
the rest
that
of the world
there's
does,
part of us too that's a whole nother podcast. That's the addiction part, you know, and it's painful. It's not just as easy as, well, something else, like I can go do something else or make something else. It's that we literally like can't find ourselves making that choice because we're so addicted to the product.
Yep.
And that's a whole other podcast, so we do have to go. We do have to wrap it up for today.
All right. Well, guys, thank you so much. And, we're praying that little things like this, that we're conscious of them in a way, like Ashley said, that's not judgmental or condemning, but that's just going to send our families on a better trajectory.
Yeah. And I think we need to remember that it's not a non-spiritual choice. Like, I think we can try to separate it and be like, well, that's not really about spirituality. Like, why are they doing this podcast? Like, aren't they Christians? Like, don't they have God things to talk about? I feel like stewarding our bodies and stewarding our children, all of that is a huge, huge thing. And to not just like, I can be super spiritual and feed my body and treat my body horribly. We don't have a pro on here today, but any pro will tell you that the Bible is chock full of information on nutrition. Right. Down to what the Lord commands Israel not to eat, all the way up through, even into the New Testament. Like, the principle of moderation is huge, but it just nutrition in general. And we could talk about, I'm just thinking even like the health benefits. I'm thinking about like the cardiac issues and diabetes and all of these things that we have just settled with because we can't change our diets. Right. That we've just accepted. So let's pray. You better quick. Better quick. Lord, we just thank you so much for insight and wisdom. We thank you, God, that your Spirit can lead us even in matters of what to eat and what not to eat. And so we ask, God, for your continued covering and just direction and clarity for our families, God, as we raise our kids, as we feed our kids, as we feed ourselves, Lord, that we would learn to discipline ourselves into what we're really meant to take in and how and why, and God, what the end result is of some of this stuff instead of just thinking in the moment. So we do pray for just insight in those areas, and for the folks who are feeling the conviction to respond, God, that you would be of assistance in those areas. So we thank you for that. We give you the glory and the honor. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. All right, our house friends and family, we look forward to seeing you here next week.
This is Messer. And I'm Willa. This is our house from A to Z. Thanks for coming over.
It's a rite of passage.